Apple's liquid glass interface sparks a readability backlash. The No Fakes Act isn't protecting victims or creating censorship infrastructure. And AI may be creating a hiring arms race. Welcome to Hashtag Trending. I'm your host, Jim Love. Let's get into it. Apple's new liquid glass interface is facing serious user backlash as beta testers struggle with widespread readability problems across iOS 26. The design, announced at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference in 2025 as Apple's broadest design update ever, uses a new effect described as glass-like transparency to create a new user experience and unify that across all Apple platforms. It's an attempt to have a major leap in design after years of minimal changes. But early users are reporting some issues. Instead of a stunning visual display, the translucent control center creates what some beta users are calling a visual mess, where buttons and sliders blend into the background, making them nearly impossible to use. The problems extend beyond the control center. Notifications on the lock screen become invisible depending on the wallpaper colors, and even Apple's own press materials show concerns about readability issues with light gray text on translucent backgrounds in Apple Music. Critics argue that the interface violates accessibility standards, definitely not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, say some, even with accessibility features on. Apple has responded quickly, releasing iOS 26 Beta 2 yesterday with improved background blur in Control Center. However, fundamental readability issues still remain unresolved across the system. The controversy recalls iOS 7's troubled 2013 launch, when Apple's last major design overhaul was also accused of prioritizing aesthetics over usability. But this time feels different. Apple is positioning liquid glass as a preparation for future augmented reality devices where visual clarity would become even more critical. Industry observers are noting that Apple may have missed the mark by adopting glass morphism, the design trend popular since 2020, rather than leading with something truly innovative. With the fall public launch approaching, Apple faces pressure to solve these basic usability problems or risk alienating users with an interface they literally can't read. The Electronic Frontier Foundation warns that the U.S. Congress faces a choice between protecting victims of AI-generated deepfakes and preserving free speech, as the latest version of the No Fakes Act draws sharp criticism from digital rights advocates. There's no question that the bill attempts to address a real harm. People, largely women and children, have been terrorized by things like revenge porn and fake nudes, with some young victims driven to suicide by AI-generated content. So-called deep fakes that can generate incredibly realistic images in minutes make this problem far worse. So the legislation would create the first federal right allowing people to sue over unauthorized digital replicas of their voice or likenesses. But the Electronic Frontier Foundation warns that the updated bill is creating what they call a whole new censorship infrastructure that could fundamentally change how the internet operates. Here's where the collision happens. The bill now requires platforms not only to remove reported content, but also filter future uploads and take down tools used to create unauthorized replicas. The EFF argues that the bill would be a disaster for internet speech and innovation, warning it creates broader censorship mechanisms than even copyright law. The stakes are deeply personal. Victims need rapid remedies when facing AI-generated abuse that can harass and even destroy reputations overnight. But the EFF points out that from the point of view of content creators, the bill offers weaker safety mechanisms than existing copyright law. No simple counter-notice processes forcing speakers to run to court within 14 days to defend themselves. The legislation also threatens anonymous speech by allowing anyone to get subpoenas from court clerks, not judges, to unmask users based on mere allegations. Critics warn this creates a heckler's veto, where bad actors can silence critics with false alarms and doxing. The Recording Academy, Motion Picture Association, and major entertainment companies back the bill as essential to protect creators. Tech platforms have mixed reactions, with some reportedly comfortable with provisions that could burden smaller competitors. And the fundamental issue remains unresolved. How do you give victims fast, effective tools against AI abuse without creating censorship systems that can be weaponized against legitimate speech? The bill does include carve-outs for parody and commentary, but as the EFF notes, those will be cold comfort for those who cannot afford to litigate. Congress must thread this needle carefully. Victims deserve protection, but where do we weigh the cost of fundamental free speech rights that protect us all? It's something that requires an intelligent and nuanced debate and a spirit of goodwill to resolve. Unfortunately, it comes at a time with the most polarized Congress in history that is unlikely to be able to resolve this. And up north in Canada, will the government take any action on this? Given that they can't seem to get basic privacy and security bills through Canadian Parliament, and that they prefer to sneak through fairly draconian sets of regulations in other legislation, the hopes in the Great White North for an intelligent, nuanced debate aren't great either. The job market has become an algorithmic arms race where AI-generated resumes battle AI screening systems while skilled job openings remain unfilled and while hidden biases in the software may be systematically blocking qualified candidates. Resume Builder's latest survey reveals the scope. 99% of employers now use AI in hiring, while job seekers fight back with AI application bots and can submit hundreds of applications daily. One engineering manager reported receiving 150 applications within 7 minutes of posting a role. But here's the cruel paradox. 54% of hiring managers say they care if candidates use AI to write resumes, even though they're using AI to screen them. When 625 hiring managers were asked about red flags, AI-generated resumes topped the list, ranking higher than employment gaps or lack of achievement. Yet few people understand the monster that they've created. A case in the U.S. has been filed to expose how applicant tracking systems operate as black boxes, and nobody really knows how they score candidates. One individual, after 100 straight rejections, suspected software was flagging his profile, potentially blacklisting him across the entire system. And even if that weren't true, computer scientists warn that these scoring algorithms can shut out job seekers through mechanical errors like misclassifying job titles or more troubling algorithmic mistakes that systematically penalize certain groups. Harvard researchers found that these systems screen out millions of qualified workers for arbitrary reasons like resume gaps or not matching every qualification in a lengthy job description. And the human cost is stark. The person who we talked about earlier raised a lawsuit and only got hired when a human recruiter called him directly, leading to an interview and a job offer at Allstate, where he's been promoted twice. It's a great illustration of what is lost when algorithms replace human judgment. And meanwhile, the arms race escalates. AI tools meant to help job seekers beat algorithmic screening often backfire, creating generic applications that trigger automated rejections. Companies deploy ever more sophisticated AI to filter the flood of AI-generated applications, creating a feedback loop that removes humans from both sides of the equation. Perhaps the solution isn't more automation. There are a number of areas where AI and automation can help in AR functions, automating simple questions and processes, making self-serve actually work. But perhaps the engagement and hiring of humans is something where, for the time being, only humans can lead the way. And finally, Warren Buffett said, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently." That applies to people and to companies. And in that light, it appears that Microsoft might be rethinking some recent actions in cutting off International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan's email access. Microsoft appears to have realized the true impact of what they've done, and now they're trying desperately to reframe what happened. Here's what we found out about the story from multiple sources, and we've reported on this in parts. In February, President Trump sanctioned Prosecutor Karim Khan, the lead prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. This happened after the ICC issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Now, the sanctions for issuing these warrants were severe. Freeze any property Khan had in the United States and a restriction on his admission into the U.S. One could question whether these were fair, but they fall within U.S. law and presumably could be litigated there. But the sanctions took another step, imposing sanctions on not just Khan, but any person, institution, or company providing financial, material, or technological support. Read that last one. Technological support to sanctioned individuals facing potential fines and imprisonment. And that's where Microsoft enters the picture. Microsoft, presumably afraid of the sanctions, implemented them, canceling Khan's email address, throwing the court into an upheaval. Khan was ultimately able to switch to Swiss email provider Proton Mail, according to ICC staffers interviewed by the Associated Press, who ran the story in the first place. Now, everyone knows if your email was shut down and you had to pick up from scratch somewhere else, how difficult that could be. The implications are clear. Even though this individual was acting in another sovereign country with the full support of the government of that country, Microsoft was bound to obey the edict of a foreign government, the U.S. It's exactly what those in Europe who are arguing for digital sovereignty are warning about. And it's exactly what Microsoft has been promising they'd never let happen as they try to persuade European governments to use their cloud and their software. So it's no wonder that Microsoft President Brad Smith has been forced to backpedal, now claiming his company was not in any way involved in the cessation of services to the ICC. Which raises the question, if cutting off the chief prosecutor's email doesn't constitute cutting services, what exactly does? The reality is that it appears to many that the tech giant folded under U.S. government pressure and is now trying to find plausible deniability. Microsoft argues vainly that they simply disconnected one individual under sanctions while keeping services running for the institution. But the real impact tells a different story. Reportedly, 6 senior ICC officials have resigned over sanctions concerns, and some NGOs have stopped working with the court. And at least 10 Dutch government organizations are now seeking alternatives to U.S. cloud services, according to the Intermax Group Director Ludo Bau. The timing couldn't be worse for Microsoft's European expansion. Just weeks before the ICC incident, Smith toured Brussels, promising to defend European interests from geopolitical volatility. As Dutch software expert Bert Hubert noted, a few weeks ago they issued all these grand statements and promises that this would never happen. And now, it happens anyway. So Microsoft's word games can't change the reality. While the company seems to have found a bit of courage and now promises it will resist pressures in the future, we'll see whether that happens or not, the reality is that when pressured in the present tense, the company chose to comply with a specious U.S. compliance order and execute that against someone in another sovereign country. And if that isn't a digital kill switch in action, we'd like to know what is. Further, this came to the world's attention because of the position of the individual and the backlash that it generated. If you were a single individual, perhaps a whistleblower, or even a staunch advocate of positions not acceptable to the U.S. administration, would Microsoft defend you, or would you lose your key services? And a note to the U.S. authorities, in case you're thinking about coming after us, we're staying north of the 49th parallel, and we use open source software. And that's our show. As always, especially when I'm telling you what I think, we'd love to hear what you think. You can reach us now at the Contact Us form at our new improved open source software website at technewsday.com or .ca. Take your pick. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a wonderful Wednesday.